So how I got involved in storytelling. I had been an actor for a number of years, and I wasn't earning enough money doing that to raise my daughter. And I took up a book called What Color is Your Parachute, which was a creative job search manual. And hot damn, it told me I should be a performer. And I thought it would say something between the office work I was doing to support my daughter and the desire to be on stage. But no, it said I should be on stage. So I looked around for other ways to do that and heard my first storyteller. And I was enchanted by what he was doing. I can't remember quite the order, but I worked on a story as an audition piece to get into the Playhouse Theatre. It was a 2.5 minute story, and I thought, I know I'm not going to get this audition. It's a big prestigious theater. I'm a nobody, but I'll just do something in 2.5 minutes that they will enjoy in toto. Like, I think that's the way to say it, but the whole thing would be there. And my future partner, Nan Gregory, she and I went into storytelling together. She and I worked on a little story for me to tell that long. The one where somebody, a king he's always listening to stories and not doing his kingly duties. And so there's a contest, like somebody tell me a story that will make me say enough, no more. And this woman comes and she keeps saying, then a little ant went into the silo and took away a grain of rice. And then another little ant went in and took another grain of rice, until at last the king could say enough. Anyway, what I learned when I was preparing for that audition is that I really loved telling the story. I would collar people at the laundromat, on the bus. Look, it's only 2.5 minutes long. Can I tell you this story? I had so much fun. And when that combined with this creative job search and seeing storytellers, I thought, I want to do this.
You are the only person I know who became a storyteller to earn money.
Well, my dad told me when I was growing up, he said he didn't like his job very much, but he needed to do it to raise 2 kids. And he said, try and find something to do that you love. And all I've ever loved is performing. So later in life, when I was telling stories and I earned a small living, I mean, I even paid taxes sometimes.
Wow.
I know, it's amazing. But I remember saying to him, it's your fault I'm a storyteller. And I said, you told me to find something I love, and this is it. He said, yeah, but I may have said that, but I didn't say don't earn any money at it. Because, of course, I wasn't earning huge amounts. But the thing I was incredibly happy. I have spent 36 years as a storyteller. I'm 73, so that adds up to roughly half my entire life.
So, 2 quick questions. When did you get the job?
For that audition? No,
yeah.
I did not. However, one of the jury was a guy named Powys Thomas, who used to be acting in England, came over to Vancouver and started a theater company. And he invited me. He said, I can't take you on for the school that you were auditioning for. This was another audition. But I do like what you do. And I'd like you to come to some lessons I'm giving to somebody else. And I learned an awful lot more about theater from him.
So obviously there's a jump then from learning, liking stories and being in theatre to actually being a storyteller. I mean, how easy was it to be a storyteller in Vancouver? And I mean, is there much of a storytelling scene? Are there other storytellers? And
it's sort of sad. It has grown. When Nan and I started as Wives' Tale storytellers, there weren't any other storytellers at all that I was aware of until we found a group of children's librarians who, at the university here, were trained in storytelling. And we went to one of their meetings and were blown away by how nice they were. And that became the seed of a community for us, of people who love to tell stories. They wanted to tell stories to grown-ups as well as to children. So they got together at the Quaker Meeting Hall once a month, and we all told stories. And the other thing that Nan and I did to make money was go around to schools and go in and try and get an appointment with the principal. And they'd say, so what is this storytelling? Do you read to the kids? We'd say, no, let me show you, or let us show you. And then we'd tell them a story. And inevitably their faces would go all soft and their eyes would kind of glitter a little bit. And they'd say, oh, that'd be great. So we started working in schools. And we happened to hit a period of time when the school board in Vancouver and elsewhere, other school boards, were interested in bringing the arts in. And a storyteller didn't cost as much as a lot of storytellers. I mean, a lot of performers who needed instruments that needed sound equipment and had to be moved around. And we charged hardly anything for our work when we started. I think it was $40 a show or something.
Well, I hope it went up. I'm not surprised you could barely eat on that.
No,
But,
no, we didn't do that well at first. That was in '84. And that's what we did. We just hustled. We made phone calls. We built up a repertoire.
So if that's an 84, we were talking, and I think I came over in 94.
Okay.
So in 10 years, you had obviously built up enough of a network and enough of an audience to be able to hold a storytelling whole festival and bring people in from overseas.
Yep.
Because I knew nothing about Canada and storytelling in Canada until I was sort of very lucky that I was I did a year's of storytelling apprenticeship, and which is when I got to know Duncan. And Duncan didn't like to travel on his own, so you invited him to Vancouver Storytelling Festival, and he said, I'll only come if I can bring Amy with me. And you managed to pay for both of us and bring us both over there. And it was and for me, it was a really wonderful experience. And that is how we first met. So how many festivals had you run by that point? I mean, that's quite an achievement in 10 years to have got to that stage.
Yeah. Well, 92 was the first one. And the person who was the main drive was Helen O'Brien, who wasn't a storyteller, but she'd heard Nan and I on our local radio station, and she made a date with us, and we went for a walk in a park with her and the two of us and her dog, and we talked about how could we make storytelling more front and center in people's minds. And she came up with the idea of a festival. And she was a great fundraiser. So she hustled up money for it. I became the publicist. And Nan and I were both on the board of directors with 3 other people. And when Duncan came, I remember I was introducing him the night that he was featured on the big stage in the evening. We had breakouts and workshops and stuff in the daytime, but the evening was to feature certain storytellers. And I had been asked to introduce him. And I made a mistake. I introduced him as a gypsy from Scotland. And as he came up onto the stage, he very sweetly, but definitely said, I'm not a gypsy, I'm a traveler. The traveler folk are different. And he did it. He did it in such a way that I was not mortified, which I could have been. So he was all of my memories of him. I cry easily, sorry. He was so gentle. I remember you saying that the other day, and it's really true. He just looked after you.
He was a gentle man in the, in the 2-word definition, a gentle man.
Yeah.
How on earth did you hear about him to book him for the festival?
I don't know. It was Helen that did it. And I phoned her a couple of nights ago and said, how did you get Duncan here? And she said, I don't know. Somebody I know told me about him, but she couldn't remember who it was. And then I think she probably went about, we have a Canada Council for the Arts, and they will help arts organizations to bring people over. So I think that was probably what happened. And
So,
she was a genius. You know, she is a genius.
so what were you expecting? I mean, because obviously I knew Duncan very well, and I'm really intrigued as to what you were expecting when Duncan came to Vancouver, when you've never met him before, when you didn't really know very much about Scottish travellers, and there's this guy that you've vaguely heard of. What were you expecting, and what did you actually get?
I think I was so busy trying to get bums in seats for that festival. I don't remember much about what I was expecting. And I can't remember which story he told the first time I heard him, but I just knew that I was in good hands. When he started to tell, I felt carried safely in his story. And I do remember that he told Selkie stories, and I had loved Selkie stories since I was a kid. I had heard one or two. So I was just delighted that there were others. And I had done some homework in order to sell bums and seats, but I think I was just glad Helen had brought him and brought you. Do you know what I remember about you?
Yes. I dread to think, but yes.
The first time I actually had a talk with you, you were up in a tree.
I thought you might say that. Yeah, I do remember that.
And you had to jump down out of this tree. And I'd been impressed that anybody of 19 even knew about storytelling in such a way as to be apprenticed. I thought England must be an amazing place that they have apprentices for storytelling, because there were no storytellers here that you could apprentice with. Like, we were all kind of in it together moving forward. There was a woman named Alice Kane in Toronto, and Toronto treated her, she was their mentor. And she had come across from England, I believe. And she was a librarian, a children's librarian. And she had a very specific way of telling stories. And when she would tell stories, I finally got to hear her years later when I went to Toronto. I was in the back of a 300-seat theater that was packed. She was this little tiny woman on a black stage, sitting in a chair, hardly moving. And I felt like I was at her knees from the sound of her voice. She had a voice to charm the angels. And I think for me, what Duncan had in part was a different voice, but he could charm the angels. It was just lovely.
Do you remember any of his stories? Do you tell any of his stories still?
I do tell. Oh, I got it out of his book of Selkie stories. I haven't told it for a while.
Well, I don't want to put you on the spot, but one thing I was very interested in was, because that's such a strong part of his tradition. And when I went to Vancouver, everybody was obsessed with the sea. Everybody seemed very connected with the sea. Everybody was like waiting for the weekend or their holidays so that they could go kayaking, and they could go kayaking around the islands. And obviously Vancouver and Scotland and Canada have such a strong connection, and so many Scottish went over and settled in Canada. I did wonder kind of if lots of his stories were familiar, if there were stories that had already crossed and had already taken root in that land, so that you were hearing an echo and kind of a parallel version of that story, and they might have sort of separated and gone in slightly different directions, but if they were still kind of cross-connected.
Sorry.
Take your time, don't worry. So for anybody who's come recently, so Melanie has a cough anyway. Poor Melanie is self-isolating, and she hasn't been struck down with the dreaded COVID-19. She hasn't seen anybody in real life for weeks to be able to catch it. So this is not one of the symptoms. She's going to be fine. I think she's back with us. You're back. Welcome.
It's always a crapshoot whether I've got my voice at the same time. As I said once in Wales, I never smoked either. This isn't about maltreating my lungs. Anyway, we'll take a throat lozenge and see how I do. Because you've brought up a really good point. I was familiar with a Selkie story, essentially where a man tricks a Selkie by stealing her sealskin. He keeps her as a wife on land. And there's a number of variants of how it ends and how it happened. But the one that I told most frequently was set in BC, and I found it somehow in a book. But there was something like 17% of the people who were coming to BC around the time it first became BC were Scottish. And somebody must have brought this story with them and then reset it along the coast of BC, which is very rugged. And in those early days, there were no highways except the sea. That's the only way you could get up the coast of BC or go from Vancouver Island to the mainland of BC. So this story was actually about a man who came from Scotland and decided to become a fisherman. It was what he knew how to do. And there were places up the coast over time where they had fish canneries, and he would sell to a fish cannery, but he lived alone and he was lonely, and he sees the Selkies dancing on the shore. They're all these beautiful young men and women. And he had heard those stories when he grew up in Scotland, but he didn't believe them. And here it was. And he was so lonely that he did something reprehensible and hid one of the Selkies' furs. And she stayed with him and was his wife. They did grow to love each other, but in the end, when she found her skin tucked up behind the lintel of the door, she went away back to the ocean. So it's kind of a sad story, and it's a good story to tell to children like it, as well as adults. And I was telling it in a school one time and realized the potency of it when one little girl, she was in grade 4, started to cry, and she had to be taken out. And somebody afterwards told me, it's not your fault, it's that her parents are divorced. And the story ends with him losing his wife. So it was something to be aware of when telling stories. I don't know if you find that, like, you choose stories for your audience.
I think the Selkie stories are very profound. I mean, I think, and all stories are, but that story, particular one, is one that comes up all over the world in lots of different variations. And I think it really does, it strikes a chord, and there's a reason that it's told. And I think that there's lots and lots of reasons that people tell that. And sometimes it is about kind of from the child's perspective of parents falling out of love with each other, or just even that, you know, grown-ups can love each other, but they have other needs in their lives, that there can be something else that's pulling them away. And I think that there's so many stories about women through ages and ages who have, you know, it's relatively recently that women can choose their partners, and men too, to a certain degree. I mean, you know, arranged marriages have been the way it's done in cultures for time out of mind, and lots and lots and lots of stories. You know, you've got the prince and the princess, and they're betrothed from birth, and all of those stories like Tamlin and Rapunzel are about kind of politics, you know, and the politics of marriage. But women in particular, it's the politics just of families, and women don't always have a choice in where they end up, but they do have a spirit inside them, and that I think most women have some bit of fierceness inside them, that it's always going to be that little bit of wildness, and stories like that with a bit of hope about kind of just being their true selves, of being in their true home, and choosing their own destiny. I mean, there's so many themes in that story, and I'm just going to check, because there's lots of people. You can talk to us on the chat, feel free to get the chat box up and put in questions and go, nobody's gone, what's a Selkie? And I just wanted to check, I mean, does everybody know what a Selkie is? They're the stories of the seal people. So the seals that live in the sea, they are people on land and seals in the sea. And Chloe's going, I do. So yeah, my daughter has come in online, and she has been raised on the seal stories. If you don't know what a Selkie is, Chloe, there is no hope for either of us. And Selkies are a lot like fairies in some way. They are a reflection of you. If you treat them well, then they will treat you well. If you treat them badly, then they won't. And they're very much a reflection. But there's also the wild side of the sea. A lot of the Selkie stories are about this thing of balance, that the fishermen, which is such a big part of life in Canada and as well on the coast in Scotland, you take your life in your hands when you go out in a boat and when you go fishing. And there's a lot of competition for fish, and a lot of the point of the Selkie stories is that you will have a fisherman who is angry with the seals because the seals have got into his net and they've stolen the fish, and there will be an older fisherman, his father or the wife, going, you have gone into the seals' world, you've gone into their garden and you're taking their food. How would you feel if the seals came into ours and took the potatoes out of our garden? That's what you're doing with the seals. And it's about how you live in harmony with the world around you, how you take what you need and you don't take too much. And there's so much in that, and the stories are very simple on the surface, but I think particularly in the times when we live in, when we are constantly talking about how do we live in harmony with the planet, how do we balance things so that there will be fish next time that we go fishing and still have enough to feed everybody now. We don't want people to go hungry, but we don't want people to go hungry in the next generation either. And there is so much greed in the way that our society is set up, and a lot of the traveller stories and Selkie stories are kind of dead set against that. So I've gone on a bit of a rant and a ramble back there, but hopefully that kind of gives a bit of a background to some of the Selkie stories.
There's a wonderful book called People of the Sea. In fact, I think it's right here. Yeah, David Thompson. Is that the same David?
I have it on my bookshelf over there too.
See this? Oh, it's backwards for me. You can't read it. The People of the Sea.
Oh no, we can read it. It comes up fine.
A Journey in Search of the Seal Legend. This is a wonderful, wonderful book. And I think it is very appropriate. And I'm thinking now of one of Duncan's stories that I've read, where that comes up about the greed. And that's what's going on with fisheries all over the world now, is greed, like taking everything and killing everything that isn't what you want to eat. And it's interesting how the stories, even though they're old, connect with.
Yeah, and culling the seals just so that they don't take the fish. Yeah. Just to killing the seal population so that there are more fish for the people, which in stories does not ever end well. And I think often in real life as well. It's interesting. So Ranga's going, I just Googled the Selkies because she didn't know what they were and she wondered what we were talking about. And she's found pictures of them looking like mermaids. And I would say that in stories, Selkies do not ever look like mermaids. They are either a seal or they are a person. They're not both. But they take off their coat. And so they leave their seal skin and then they come out and they have, they're human all over, which is what happens in that story, is that the skin is then taken away so that she can live as a human woman and can't return to the sea because she doesn't have her skin. In Duncan's stories, you know that a Selkie is a Selkie because they have dark eyes, they have dark hair, they have pale skin, and they usually wear a seal skin coat. And quite often the women are called Rona because Ron is the Gaelic for seal. So that's always a little bit of a giveaway. But they can sometimes give give seal coats from seals who've gone before, so that they can take people who have been kind, who've lived good lives, and they can give them a second life in the sea. And there's also a side that kind of, if you have lost people at sea and they don't come back, then there's a chance that they're not dead, that they might just have gone to live with the seal people. And so there's a certain amount of comfort within that as well. Yeah. And it's one of those, in the same way there's that kind of famous quote of somebody asking an Irishman, he goes, do you actually believe in the fairies? And the Irishman going, no, of course I don't believe in fairies. But that doesn't mean they're not there. It's the same thing with the seal people. It's kind of in day-to-day talk, I mean, like Duncan would say kind of, oh yes, there's this whole thing and it's a great comfort to the people who live by the sea, but he absolutely believed in the seal people. And the people that he took those stories from, they're not just stories, they were family stories. They're things that have been passed down, and it would be, this is something that happened to my grandfather, this is something that happened to my mother. You know, and this, I'm just looking at time. Have we got time for me to tell? I want to hear about you, but I'll try and tell it quickly, because there's a wonderful one that Duncan got, and it was he was told it by a man in a pub, you know, kind of that usual way. If you ask people, do you know any stories, and people go, oh no, I don't really know any stories. But if you start telling stories, then people will go, oh well, actually that does remind me of something. And so he was sat talking to this guy, and he said, well, never told anybody this before, but this is a true story, and this happened to my grandfather. His grandfather was a lighthouse keeper, and in those days they would go out for 6 months at a time, and they would go out for big long stints, and it was before they had rules on how many people could be alone. And it's a really good story for these times, because he was completely isolated on the lighthouse. He would be dropped off, he would live there on his own, he would have a little kitchen, he would have all of his tinned food, and he might have a couple of deliveries while he was out there, but it would completely depend on the weather, because if the weather was bad, then the boat wouldn't be able to get out. And you know, even if your stint was up, you know, your stint might be extended by a month if the weather wasn't good and people couldn't get out to the island, to the lighthouse. Anyway, on this particular stint, his wife had packed his suitcase for him, and he unpacked him when he got there, and there were 3 slippers, and he sat there and he laughed as he looked at these 3 slippers, and she'd obviously just, you know, he had a pair for at home and a pair for the lighthouse, and she'd just put 2 left ones in and a right one, and he just sort of sat and laughed and thought about his wife, and he put them under the bed. And his time went on and his stint went on until there was a terrible storm, and he went down once the weather had cleared, and he'd been stuck inside for ages, and he was so glad that it was finally a nice day, and he walked down to the little cove that was there, and he took his fishing rod and he was going to fish, but he never got as far as fishing because there was a half-grown seal washed up, and he could see that, you know, she was alive. She wasn't dead actually, but she was exhausted. She'd obviously been rolled and tumbled, caught in the surf. And so he picked her up and he took her back to the lighthouse. He got a tin of mackerel and he opened it up and he fed her and he sort of kept her warm, and she started to perk up. You know, she ate all the fish and then she went to sleep. And when she woke up, well, obviously the sleep and the food had done her the power of good, and she started flipping around after him, and he called her Flippy because he'd just hear the flip, 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 flip of her flippers. And he looked after her until she was back to full strength. And, you know, it was just great to have some company. It was great to have another living soul in the lighthouse. And the slippers came into their own, because they started a game as if she was a dog, that he'd throw the slippers across the room, and she'd flip, 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 pick up the slipper in her mouth, come back, and she'd line them up in a row, 1, 2, 3, and he'd throw the 3 slippers again, and she'd flip, 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 go and get 3 slippers, bring them back. But she was a young seal, and though it was great to have her in the lighthouse, it wasn't the place for a seal to be. And so one day said, look, there's nothing wrong with you. Come on, come back down to the sea. And he took her back down to the sea. It was another lovely day. And as they came to the cove, a head bobbed out of the water and another head bobbed out of the water. And he said, look, your family's here to greet you. And she kind of looked back at him. And he said, it's all right, go on, go on. And she went into the waves and she swam out and she lifted up her head and she looked back at him once and said, go on with you. They're waiting for you. And then they all bet the three heads, and then they dove down out of the water, and he stayed there for a little while. And his fishing rod was still there. He'd left it when he took Flippy back up to the lighthouse, and he started fishing. And he spent the afternoon there, but she didn't come back. Well, it seemed even more lonely after that, but he thought, well, at least I've got a good story to tell my wife and to tell my kids when I get back home. And the time was slowly going on and going on. But there was another great storm, and he went up to light the lamp, and he'd left one of the windows open, and the wind had got up and got up. And as he went up, the window just slammed shut. And as it slammed shut, the gust of wind must have knocked some of the oil or spattered some of the oil out somehow from the light. And there was a slick patch on the step, and he slipped on the step and he fell. And he was lying there, and he'd really hurt his leg, and he thought, I didn't make it up to the light. And if I don't light the light, there's going to be terrible accidents. And he was trying desperately to move so that he'd get the light, and he just passed out. Well, the next thing he knew, he was in his bed, and he opened his eyes, and he couldn't understand how he got there. And then he heard a flip, 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 like the sound of flippers on the floor. And he thought, it's Flippy, she's come back, but how could Flippy be here? And then into the light, in through the door came a young woman, and she had bare feet, and it was her bare feet that was making the sound. And he said, who are you? And where did he come from? And she said, oh, there was a terrible storm, and I was out with some friends, and I got lost overboard, and I managed to swim. I managed to keep my head above the water. I don't know where my friends are and what happened to them, but I got washed up in this cove, and I came up here, and I found the lighthouse, and I managed to work out how to light the light, because I thought that was probably meant to happen. But on the way I found you, and I managed to get you into bed, and now the storm's died down and everything's fine. He said, how on earth did you know how to light the light? And she said, well, I think I just knew it needed to happen, and so I worked it out. And so she stayed there, and she cared for him, and it seemed an absolute miracle that she'd come at just the point when he most needed her. And she kept brewing him this evil, strange, seaweedy tasting drink, but it seemed to be really doing the trick and curing him, and his leg got better much quicker than he would have thought possible. Until he could get up and he could walk around, and he knew that the boat was coming soon. And he said, well, don't worry, the boat's going to be here soon to pick me up. The weather's looking good. You'll be able to go home, find out what happened to your friends. I really hope that they're all right, and I'll be taken back to land. And it's all going to be fine. Anyway, so the boat arrived, and he got all of his stuff packed up. Everything was ready. And his mate came up, and he said, oh gosh, you'll never believe what's happened. This has just been such an eventful trip out here. I've got so many things to tell you. And look, and you got to meet Rona. There was no sign of the young woman, Rona. She'd vanished. They looked all through the lighthouse, all around the island, and thought, well, maybe she'd gone swimming again and got lost. And he was starting to get really, really worried. But when he just checked the lighthouse one last time, there by his bed were the 3 slippers that he was sure he'd packed in his suitcase, but they were laid out 1, 2, 3. And then finally, only then finally, did he realise just who Rona was, and that actually Rona was back with her family, and Rona was just fine. So anyway, that's just to give you a taste, I suppose, just to give you an idea of what a Selkie story is like. And they're meant to be told conversationally. They're true stories, they're real life stories, and they've now got this sort of supernatural mythic element, but they wouldn't normally be told outside of a society that believed in them. And it's they're just really, they're some of my favourite stories.
And you've made me think of a story. It's not a Selkie story. It's from South America. Can I tell it?
Yes, please do.
Okay. It's from the Yamana people who live down at the very tip, southernmost end of South America, Tierra del Fuego. And the tribe, they liked to go egg hunting on a certain island that was uninhabited except for all the birds. But they couldn't go out very often because the weather around Tierra del Fuego is very very unpredictable. But they were able fishermen, fisher folk, and they did make the crossing from their home to this island one time and spread out over it, gathering eggs. And then the weather turned suddenly, and everybody started streaming back to the boats. And one woman was left behind. She was on the further side. She hadn't realized what was going on, and she was too late. They had all gone back to the mainland. Now, she knew that somebody would come back for her. They knew she was on the island. So she just had to keep herself alive until then. And she was a resourceful person, and she had lots of eggs to eat. And she found rainwater trapped in rocks and she could drink. And she'd even found a little bit of wood that she could burn and make a fire with in a little cave that she also located. So she looked after herself, except she was lonely. She was so lonely. It kept her awake at nights. And one night when the fire had burned down pretty much, not out, it was just a little glow, there was some movement at the entrance to the cave across from where she was sleeping. And into the cave came a cormorant, those big black birds with long necks that like to stand, like here in Vancouver, they put their wings out to dry. They hold their wings out in the sunshine because they're divers when they go hunting for food, and they don't have oil in their wings to shed water because they need to dive deep. So that's what they do. They stand around. And 1, 2, 4, 5 cormorants crowded into the little cave, and they were trying to get their wings dry around the fire. And they started talking to each other, and she could understand them. They were speaking Yamana. And she started to creep up closer to them. She didn't want to startle them, but she wanted to get closer. And she listened to what they were saying about, their hatchlings and what kind of fish they'd found and how the weather had buffeted them this day or that. And at one point, one of them said something about going. It said, we should leave. And she said, oh, please don't. And for the first time, the birds realized that there was a human there. And they immediately started crowding to get out the little narrow entrance. And she's saying, don't go, please don't go. They all left the cave. She followed them, and they were taking off into the sky. And she was pleading with them to come back. She meant them no harm. And as she reached out towards them, stretching her arms skyward, she noticed that they were going black with feathers. And she looked down, and her whole body was being covered with black feathers. And she moved her arms, and there was power in them. And she lifted them up and down and up and down. And she took off saying, wait for me. I hope they did. That's that story.
Oh, what a great story. And it reminds me, so when I came over with Duncan, I mean, one of the really one, I mean, we had so many special experiences. I mean, we were looked after well, and it was a whole eye-opening experience for me. But one of the things was being invited to go and meet some of the First Nations elders, and that was really powerful and very special. And that's certainly how Duncan saw himself. And I think how some of the Scottish Traveller stories, actually, they have lots of those elements of First Nation stories, and they do have a lot of totemic animals and spirit journey type stories. Because the Scottish Travellers would say that they were the first people in Scotland, and that since then lots of other nations and races have come in and they've settled the land, and they put sheep on it, and they put up stone walls and fences and everything else, but the Scottish Travellers are still travelling, and they are the original nomadic people. And so that time when we met the First Nations people was really special, and actually were introduced to some of their totems and to the totem poles. And part of that whole thing was about how you address people within society as well, that actually, as we talked to some of the elders, had a lot of resonance and a lot of similarities. And that thing is a mark of respect, that you address people, even when they're strangers, as family, because they are friends and family that you haven't met yet. And if you think of somebody that you are just meeting as a sister or a grandmother or a brother, you treat them in a very different way than if you go, hello, stranger. And we did a lot of talking about that while we're in Canada. And so you, Melanie, instantly became my sister. All the letters that we have exchanged since then, they've always started off dear sister. And the same with Nan Gregory and Helen O'Brien, and kind of the four of us through Duncan became sisters, which was a really beautiful gift. And so this is 25 years ago, and we've been quite distant sisters. And I think that's the thing, when you grow up and you live on the other side of the Atlantic, sisters don't always stay in touch that often, but the bond has always stayed. And I always think of the four of us, and so the three of you in that way. And so Duncan, he would call himself my third grandfather, which, I think my mum said that for the first time, and he loved that, and I loved it. He was an extra grandfather, and I got this whole other kind of set of family through Duncan. And I don't know if you and Nan and Helen ever talk about that anymore, and what kind of your memories of that are.
Well, Helen lives on an island off the coast now. She doesn't come to Vancouver often. I see her now and then. And I did have a lovely chat with her on the phone the other night, just about all sorts of things.
She has this she has this marvelous, it's an organic farm that she runs. And she has the Angora goats. They're really special goats, and kind of, so she just exports the fur wool from these goats all around the world, kind of these special Angora woolen goats. And it's an amazing place, I have to say. It's a good place to go to.
Yeah, it is indeed. And where was I?
Sorry,
I can't remember. And Nan and I, we stopped telling stories as wives' tales about the 5th year, so that'd be 89. And both of us worked as independent storytellers for a number of years. And then Nan went off and started writing books. I don't know if you've ever read any of her books.
I have. I've got Wild Girl and Gran, and a couple of others. She's a fantastic author.
She's
I really recommend her. If you haven't come across Nan Gregory, go and check her out.
Yeah, she's great. And she still tells stories now and then. We have something wonderful in Vancouver. It's fallen into disrepair lately, but excuse me. For many years, a woman named Kira Van Duzen, who's a storyteller here, would organize an epic weekend. It was once a year, and we would choose some major piece. One year it was the Ramayana. Another year it was the Mabinogion. One time we told the Kalevala, and we just would, everybody, there might be 30, 35 people involved. We would all take pieces and we would thread them together from Friday evening through Saturday into Sunday afternoon late. And there'd be breaks for meals and walks. But essentially, we were listening to this one long story. And why did I start talking about that? It was an incredible experience. You felt like you'd gone traveling. And we usually had somebody with us who was a part of the culture. Like we connected when we did the Kalevala. We connected with a person who was from, now I'm forgetting, Kalevala is Finland?
Finland.
Yes.
Yeah, it's Finnish.
And, we did a Norwegian epic and found people from there's actually a home for seniors of Norwegian descent in Vancouver. It became a way to hear people that you didn't often, because people would come from California or Ontario to take part in that particular telling. They have an epic telling in Ottawa as well. I don't know if other parts of Canada do it. I've forgotten the train of thought I had. What were you talking about before I started?
We were talking about sisters and kind of that sisterhood and about First Nations storytellers.
Man, she tells at these epics. She no longer works as a professional storyteller, but she will come and tell a story there. And one of the things I love about Nan is she always takes risks, no matter what she's doing in terms of storytelling. She pushes herself into a place she hasn't been before. I used to wonder why she was always so nervous before a storytelling when she'd had so many years telling. It's because she was always trying something new. And every time I'm in a room where she's telling a story, I feel greatly privileged that I got to hear it. Chinese stories, we did a whole Monkey King, the whole Monkey King. And I remember watching her become the woman who was the heroine of that story of hers in a way that, you know, she looked different. She walked differently. It was very powerful. And that was all I wanted to say, was my connection to Nan is sometimes through stories and sometimes just in good chat. So, yeah.
So that's really interesting. I mean, we have epic weekends here as well. But I mean, for me, my storytelling is very, very connected with landscape, and the stories that I tell are usually from places that I've been, and most of the stories that I tell are British, not all, and I mean, I lie completely in that kind of, I do tell grim stories as well, because I suppose that they really feel like part of my childhood, and they become part of European lore, and they kind of most of them happen in a European land that has changed. It is a fairy tale world, and it kind of feels like we all have access to that, and where I live and kind of my culture totally understands the laws of that land. Kind of, you know, we understand about the rule of three and kind of what it means if you share bread and salt and things. So it's kind of that feels like it's part of my landscape. That's part of my imaginary landscape. But most of the stories are from the land beneath my feet, or from the stories that I got from Duncan and from spending time in Scotland with him. And how is it with Vancouver? Because it's really interesting to me that you've kind of sort of sat there and said, yeah, we did the Chinese stories and we did the Finnish stories, and because that feels quite alien to me. So I love to hear stories from those places, but I don't feel that I know enough about those cultures to be able to tackle kind of one of their great epics and tell it the way that it should be told. But I guess in Vancouver it's kind of strange, because maybe the stories that are of the land aren't accessible to everybody, and the stories that you have gained are from places that everybody's come from. So if you've got this home for Norwegian elders, and if you're able to connect with those different cultures, if all those cultures have come to Vancouver and had this great melting pot, then that might feel very different. That ended up being quite a long conversation, but quite a long question. But I wonder how you kind of feel about that connection to landscape and where stories come from.
Well, I know that about your storytelling. I've noticed it, that you're very connected to landscape, and I love it. And there's, oh gosh, this is such a huge topic. I think you're right. Vancouver as a city and Canada as a country have many, many settlers who've come from other places. And when we've done the epics, we have had people from those cultures help us to understand what it was we were saying, or why we would say it this way or not another. And I remember when we told an African epic from West Africa, we have two African storytellers in Vancouver area, Jean-Pierre Makosso and Comfort Ero. She's from Nigeria, he's from Congo Brazzaville. They're both really good storytellers, and they came on board right away. and we'd received some flack from a woman in the States who was Black American, who said, you white folks shouldn't be telling these stories. So we went to Jean-Pierre and to Comfort and said, is this true? Should we not be telling these stories? And both of them thought that it was important they be told, that an epic was a big thing and there weren't that many Black people who were storytellers to tell the whole thing. And they wanted to be part of what was going on in the cultures that they both came from. To share stories with people of different colors wasn't, at least from their perspective, a difficulty. And I remember one of the women who told her section of the story was an adamant feminist. She still is. And she told her section of the story from the point of view of the hero's mother. And I watched Jean-Pierre's face, because she really departed from the way the story was received by us from him, from books. And he was grinning from ear to ear and reveling in the whole thing, because she was really funny and she was playing with the story. He said, oh yeah, oh yeah. So in terms of that culture in particular, the West African culture, this was a story of an ancient Malay king. There was a sense of collaboration that was fine. In terms of the stories of the First Nations here, the Indigenous people of Canada, most storytellers I know are very, very careful, because we don't know that much about that culture or the many cultures that make that up. And I've been privileged to be given some stories, either because the person who published it in a book said, you may tell this story. This story belongs to my people, but you may tell this story. Or in one wonderful case, after Nan and I had told stories in a small school outside of Vancouver, up the Fraser River, the Stalo Nation lives up there, among other places. And they invited us in to visit with their elders. And they gave us a story, which I don't know about Nan, but I still tell it. It's for little children. It's definitely a...
Oh, but I think if you're given a story like that as well, then it's actually a huge responsibility. And then it's, you know, you have a duty to tell it. And it's a story, if you're given a story in that way, it's one that needs to be out in the world. Mm-hmm. And you'll be letting down the person who gave you that story if you weren't telling it.
Okay, I hadn't thought about it that way, but I do tell it when I have very little children in my audience. And yeah, some of them I'm thinking of the longer one, which is set in Ontario and is very long. I don't often get a place to tell that story, but luckily it is totally up to me. Oh, I hear a bell ring.
I'm sorry, I have tried to turn the notifications off on this computer and there is something that keeps getting through. I've been through all my settings. I'm going to keep trying to do this.
Okay. And I just noticed that I'm not paying attention to the chat line as much as I maybe should. But
no, well, maybe have another look at the chat line in a minute, because what I am going to say is that Aranka in particular has been putting on lots of really fantastic storytelling clubs and places that you can hear stories and tell stories in Vancouver. But Aranka, you've sent them to all panelists, and it would be really fantastic if you could send it to all panelists and attendees, so that other people can know about these possibilities and these groups, so that other people, I mean, obviously it's great for us to hear about them in Britain, but we probably can't go. But for people who might be able to go to know about them would be really fantastic. So there's the Flame in British Columbia, which is a fiery grassroots storytelling series where real people share their personal true stories. Now, that is another question that I was going to ask you about, Melanie, but you know, we are not going to have time to talk about personal stories and traditional stories and about the way to both and which ones sit in your heart better and how to combine them. That's a whole big conversation.
Short answer. Short answer. I love them all. I'm sorry that some people in the world think that the only real good stories are personal stories, and I feel like that's their loss. I have found brilliant storytellers that were personal, that were family stories, that were literature, that were history. I love folk tales most, but I just love stories. I don't care.
Well, I'm with you. And as I was saying earlier, I mean, things that we would maybe call folk tales have often been told to me as true stories, as family stories, as amazing things that happened. And as time goes by, then they're considered to be not true and folk tales. And where the line crosses is an interesting place. And so the other club that Aranka is recommending is one on the North Shore, which is the West Vancouver Community Arts Silk Purse Art Centre. And so they have live storytelling with world tales, folklore songs, classical epics and personal. So that's a bit of a mix of everything.
And the Vancouver Tellers meet once a month too, at 16th and Burrard.
This is sort of an open panel. So Aranka, all you have to do is when you go onto the chat, if you click at the top, there's a thing that says all panelists and all attendees. So if you put it for all attendees as well, then everybody can see it. And that's the point of the chat, is we want everybody to be able to hear. So we're almost out of time. It's been so nice to have this time with you, Melanie, and to be able to chat stories and to reminisce a little bit and to talk about Vancouver Storytelling Festival. When I was trying to work out earlier what year I came, and I'm pretty sure it was 94. It was just at I'd done my year's apprenticeship, and it was the spring afterwards, this time of year, going to Vancouver with all the magnolia blossom out, beautiful sunshine, and just so much positivity and stories. But I managed to find this.
Oh my goodness.
A very, very old t-shirt, which I thought might have the date on it. Sadly not, but it does have the logo and a very fantastic festival. So the one question that we have got on the question and answer is the festival still going?
No.
I don't think it is it?
No.
Sadly not.
No, the whole of the Vancouver Society of Storytellers is no more, but storytelling continues. The Vancouver Tellers meet once a month, and it's community storytelling. And somebody's asking how to get hold of it. If you Google Vancouver Storytellers or me, I can get you on a list to get emails if you want to go to either that one or Silk Purse. Melanie Ray at tellus.net is my email. And if you Google Melanie Ray Storyteller, my website is actually working thanks to a miracle.
It is. It is.
Yeah. It's out of date, but it's still up there.
So it is time to wrap this up, but if anybody else has any burning questions that they want to ask, so David Thompson has asked if you're still running the festival, but also, so they're Zooming the Storytelling Club. That is happening now. And so tell us your email one more time, Melanie.
Melanie Ray, MELAN. Oh, you can see it on the screen.
Hang on a minute. Has somebody else put it up? I was just about to put it up. Is it on the screen? Hang on, Melanie Ray.
Yeah, all one word, no caps. Melanie, MELANIE RAY at TELUS .net, NET.
.net. There we go. So that's me typing that on my computer. And there we go. Now that's in the chat bar, so you can quickly copy that and use it. But again, if you just Google Melanie Ray and Storyteller, then you will find her website and the contact is on there. Failing that, you can look for me. So my name's Amy Douglas, and if you put a sort of Amy Douglas Storyteller onto Facebook or Google, again, you should be able to find me, and I will be able to get you into touch with Melanie and things that are happening in Vancouver, and put you in touch with things that are happening in Britain and Scotland as well. So thank you for the Selkirk story and the shape-shifting bird woman. A great eagle cloud is flying outside in a glorious sunset during this. Really? You've got eagles? Where are you, Serena, sorry.
We have eagles.
Cloud of eagles. Wow. Both. Thank you for being here. I know Alice had a few problems, so I'm hoping that's down to our not being somewhere live, but because I'm interviewing so many people, if you go onto YouTube and look for the Taking the Tradition on, then if there's any bits you missed, you can see them again. You can see other episodes, And next week, I'm going to be interviewing Donald Smith, who is the director of the Scottish Storytelling Centre. So he's a very fine storyteller in his own right, but he's also just been hugely instrumental in the Scottish storytelling scene. He was involved in getting storytelling happening at the Netherbow, and then to have the Scottish Storytelling Centre, which is, you know, right in the middle of Edinburgh. It's in prime position next to John Knox House, and just a wonderful, wonderful thing for Scottish storytelling and a great place to visit. So, he's got a great story about Duncan and how Duncan was very instrumental in how they designed the theatre there. So I'll be talking to him next week. The week after that, I have got Sheila Arnold, who is a fantastic African-American storyteller. And the week after that, I'm with Linda Williamson, who was Duncan's wife. So very different conversations coming up, but all hopefully really interesting and really fascinating. So every 8 o'clock, I'll be here on a Tuesday evening. And thank you so much, Melanie, for tonight, for your stories and your memories and your conversation and your thoughts.
Well, thank you for thinking to invite me. It's been a pleasure.